why an Iraqi-born man attempted to carry out the country's first suicide bombing. Before his death, Tomor Abdul Wahab al-Abdaly had recorded an audio message promising a jihad or holy war. He'd spent most of the past few years living in Britain, and a house in Luton is being searched. Our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera, has a story.
The face of the Swedish bomb plot. Tomor al-Abdaly, a man who'd spent close to a decade living in Britain. Today, questions about what lay behind his attack. On Saturday, a car registered to him exploded on a busy shopping street in Stockholm. Moments later, he was found dead following a second explosion. A suicide bomber, but one who'd failed to kill anyone else. Police raided al-Abdaly's house in Luton last night. His family was still living there. Neighbours say they hadn't seen him for nearly a month. At a local mosque, they remember him attending 3 years ago. When al-Abdaly tried to spread extremist views, they confronted him and he stormed out. They didn't inform the police.
We could not categorise him as a terrorist. We couldn't categorise him as someone who's harmful because initially when we looked at what he was saying, it could just have been his political views. Part of me does question, did I spend enough time with him? Should I have really exposed him publicly and made him storm out? Maybe perhaps I should have stayed with him and worked more with him.
Police searches are continuing here today. Neighbours talk about an ordinary family man, but the security services will be investigating how and when he might have been radicalised and, crucially, who else he might have been in contact with. So what do we know about Tomor al-Abdaly? He was born in Baghdad, Iraq in 1981. In 1992 he moved to Sweden, where he attended school. In 2001 he arrived in the UK to study at the University of Bedfordshire and settled in Luton with his family. Moments before his devices exploded, al-Abdaly sent an email saying he was protesting the publication of cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad and the presence of Swedish troops in Afghanistan. Swedish prosecutors say they now want to establish whether or not he was working alone.
We should suppose that he had others behind him if they are accomplices or just have inspired him to it in some religious way or something else.
Al-Abdaly had expressed extremist views on his Facebook page, and today a jihadist website posted an unverified claim that he'd fulfilled a pledge made to the Islamic State of Iraq, a group linked to al-Qaeda. Was he a lone radical or part of a wider conspiracy? Investigators in Sweden and Britain will be trying to find out. Gordon Carrera, BBC News, Luton.
Well, joining me now is Alexander Meleagrou-Hitchens, a research fellow at the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College, London. Do you think he was acting alone? And if so, what does this tell us about the way militants are operating in Europe now?
Well, it remains to be seen if he was acting alone or not. The involvement of explosives suggests perhaps he wasn't. But if he was, in fact, following orders, this would be part of al-Qaeda's strategy to continue 9/11 style big attacks. Otherwise, if he was acting alone, it's likely that he's following the current instructions that we're seeing a lot of the English language propaganda material from al-Qaeda, which says essentially do what you can to kill as many people as possible. If that means 1, if that means 10, do not contact anyone, stay alone, make no organizational contact. We saw in May the attack on Stephen Timms by Russian al-Abdaly was completely unconnected organizationally, though ideologically there was a large network of supporters online. It looks like he was certainly active on the online radical community, one which has a number of figures such as Anwar al-Awlaki who regularly call for these type of operations, particularly actually in his case against cartoonists. So.
And if he wasn't part of a cell, if he was acting alone, that's very difficult for the intelligence services to detect.
Well, yes, I mean one of the reasons why al-Qaeda is approaching this two-pronged strategy is because although the large-scale attacks are generally easier to track, especially because if you move around big explosives or other types of materials, they do get picked up. The reason they're pursuing the second part of this approach, which is the lone wolf, is, again, it is scarily difficult to prevent. Russian al-Abdaly was not someone who the security services had any idea about here. And it makes a lot of sense to, because the impact is often just as big, even if no one's killed. We see what kind of effects these things can have both on business, economy, travel, as well as sort of communal relations, the sort of rise of the far right. In fact, in Luton, we've seen that in direct response to what they see as aggression.
And Luton, of course, not far from London, is one area where the intelligence services have been worried in the past, haven't they? Because they know there is some radicalism amongst the Muslim community there.
Indeed. Well, in the last 12 years, we know of at least 7 instances of British Muslims being involved in Islamist or terrorist-related convictions. We also know that al-Muhajirun, a now banned jihadist group, which has long called for attacks on troops and supported attacks on troops, was very active in Luton. And it's there, in fact, where they protested against the Anglican regiment and where the EDL sprung from. And this is, again, we're seeing these type of clashes. And it's one of the main centres in London where we're having these type of problems.
I suppose there's a downside from the militants' point of view of acting alone. That is that they're not that efficient. I mean, we saw that in a way with this attempt in Stockholm because it failed.
Yes, and that's a testament to, I think, the success of our security services and of our governments who have managed to at least mitigate it to this extent. And we're going to probably see this kind of thing more often, these type of botched attacks. And in fact, they're not, if he was acting alone, again, it suggests that he probably wouldn't be using explosives because explosives are a very complicated thing to put together alone. And this is what makes me think that maybe he wasn't acting completely on his own. Otherwise, he would have done something like what they recommend, for example, taking a knife to someone or just attaching a butcher blade to the front of your car and mowing down Christmas shoppers. I mean, this is the kind of stuff they're telling them to do.
But if it is this idea of a lone attacker, as you suggest, then this could be the start, and in fact we may have seen it, as you mentioned earlier, with the attack on Stephen Timms, a Labour member of Parliament, earlier in the year, of just these very small assaults, which are potentially very dangerous.
Absolutely. I mean, as you said, it's not the start. This thing has been going on, and what I tell people is to get used to it, because this is going to continue, no doubt.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Police in France have detained a 17-year-old youth who'd been holding a number of young children and their teacher hostage at a nursery school in the city of Besançon, close to the